Bloody as a flower, this princess has a secret power. When Catra comes near her, her lips overflow and she sees the princess of power.
Hello folks, this is Mike Jenkins bringing you a review of the Princess of Power Angella action fashion doll. This is from the 1985 vintage toy line that focused on She-Ra, Princess of Power, and her Great Rebellion allies, often versus the evil Horde, which was in the toy line featured in the Masters of the Universe toy line. It's kind of confusing. It's a really confusing conundrum that Mattel, the toy company, built for themselves there. But Masters of the Universe was a toy line in the 1980s that featured He-Man, which was a phenomenon at the time. He-Man in the Masters of the Universe was a toy line that was released in 1982, which was followed up by a cartoon series that was released in 1983, which went on to become a huge success that was then copied by the likes of Hasbro and Bandai and all sorts of other companies, Tonka, etc. But Mattel did it first with Masters of the Universe. And Masters of the Universe was so successful that Mattel themselves went on to produce one or two spin-offs to Masters of the Universe. The first spin-off came to us in 1985 in the form of Princess of Power, which was an action fashion doll line that was released for girls, as opposed to a direct sequel toy line that would be released for boys. Mattel figured that they did such a bang-up job with Masters of the Universe for boys that they could replicate that success for girls. Tila had done very well in sales for both the boys market and, surprisingly to Mattel, for the girls market, that ultimately they decided that they would try to do the same thing with the girls market that they did with the boys market. Arguably, Princess of Power did okay, but perhaps compared to the numbers of Masters of the Universe, not so much. And I can do another video down the road that gets into the what's and the whys and the hows. But for today, we're going to focus on Angella. Angella was one of the first figures released, or first action fashion dolls released in the Princess of Power toy line in 1985. She is a heroic character released in the first wave. There was about 8 figures in that first wave, not counting Cowl. And Angella was on the heroic side, even though there really was just a heroic side with one lonely villain who was Catra. She is deemed the Angelic Winged guide in the toy line, and according to Justine Dancer, the primary designer of the initial run of Princess of Power, Angella started off in a design that would eventually be split into 2 characters. So Angella started off in drawings that Justine did that as the character developed actually ended up being split into 2 different characters, namely Angella and another character who would go on to become her daughter, Glimmer. Angella would evolve into one of She-Ra's allies, and again, as I said, early on in the development of the Princess of Power toy line, there were 8 characters. And the Princess of Power toy line basically mapped itself out very similar similar to how Masters of the Universe mapped itself out initially. Princess of Power is a hybrid of Masters of the Universe and Barbie. So Mattel decided to take two of their most successful toy brands and kind of sandwich them, marry them, merge them together, produce this hybrid baby, and expected that that toy line would be just as successful as its quote-unquote parents. So it's kind of a sick way to think of it, but it's like He-Man and Barbie had a baby, which was She-Ra, who turns out to be He-Man's sister. So that kind of sounds like a Jerry Springer thing, but from a business standpoint, Mattel figured that Barbie and He-Man together would be just as successful as they were on their separate girl-boy markets. So they created this action fashion doll which had the best features of Barbie and the best features of He-Man. And that toy turned out to be She-Ra and the rest of the Princess of Power toy line. So the main features that Mattel took from the Masters of the Universe line were 8 initial figures. Masters of the Universe started out with 8 figures, a playset, a vehicle, and some beasts. So the Princess of Power toy line essentially mirrored that. And what Masters of the Universe did was they had 4 good guys and 4 bad guys. And Princess of Power did the same thing. There were initially 4 good gals and 4 bad gals. So the 4 good gals were Angella, Bo, She-Ra, and Frosta. And then the villains were Catra, Castaspella, Double Trouble, and Glimmer. Toy testing with test audiences, which was composed of both little girls and parents, eventually gave feedback suggesting that, oh, you can't do a girl's toy line or you can't do a doll toy line with a bunch of bad girls in it. So most of the villainous faction was actually relegated over into the good heroic faction, only leaving Catra as the lone and primary villain. So for most of the Princess of Power toy line, Catra was by herself, and even as the villain, she was dubbed a jealous beauty. She was just kind of this mischievous, jealous girl that kind of hid out in the bushes, didn't cause much trouble, but, you know, that's as close as they would get to having a villain in the Princess of Power toy line. So Angella's action doll design differentiates from her cartoon design significantly. This is because multiple designs were underway as both the cartoon and toys were being developed. By the time toy designs were finalized and toy production commenced, the cartoon was beyond revision. The She-Ra magazine made attempts to reconcile the disparate designs by creating hybrid versions of the characters, beasts, and playsets, usually giving the toon designs toy colors, details, and accessories. For a Princess of Power or Masters of the Universe action figure, Angella has pretty standard articulation. So her head twists, back and forwards. Her arms go up and down, or they do a 360 rotation. She does have a swivel waist. She doesn't have that power twist, though. And her legs go up and down. She is able to sit on the horses or other beasts that are featured in the toy line. Her wings do have articulation as well, and you'll see that she's got the halo on the back of her wings, allow her wings to be flapped like that, like so. And the wings themselves are a sort of backpack that do detach. So often, and I'll show you the pegs there, often you'll find Angella figures without wings and often without the pantaloons. The pantaloons themselves are removable. I tend to not remove them. But oftentimes you'll find figures, Princess of Power figures or action dolls, whatever you want to call them. I'm probably just going to stick with figures, just like so. And it'll be up to you to either go on eBay and try to find the accessories and the clothing to complete the figure, or hopefully find the figure complete. I'll just give you a close-up of her face. Let's see if we'll focus here. On her bodice there, and the details on her boots. So that is the physicality of Angella, and now we'll move on to some other details about this character. The Angella action fashion doll that I have here is part of my collection, and she didn't come with many accessories. She came with her wings, and her pantaloon skirt, and that was pretty much it. The shield that's featured with her right now is actually that's an accessory that goes with Starburst She-Ra. But it was pink, and it made sense to, add to Angella just to give her something else to hold on to. But the figure looks a lot different from her depiction on the cartoon series. In the cartoon series, Angella had no skirt, no pantaloons. She had blue leggings, and she had blonde hair. The action figure, I am not sure of whether or not she had any blue leggings at any point in the development of the figure. But the prototype shots that we have seen in the past shows Angella being very close to what she looked like in her final release form, with the strawberry hair and the mostly pink and white costume. If she did have blue leggings at any time in the development of the character for the toy line, most likely that blue was pulled out because blue is considered to be a boy character, and in most cases, the blue color scheme in the Princess of Power toy line is either removed altogether, or it's diluted to be more of a powder blue or a sky blue, which is the case with Castaspella and Frosta, who are very heavy with the blues in the cartoon series, but their action figures either have watered down blues in the case of Frosta, or no blues at all in the case of Castaspella. So if Angella was developed to have blues in her toy color scheme, most likely, just as Frosta and Castaspella had happened to them, the blues were removed from the Angella action figure or action fashion doll. In the cartoon series, she had blonde hair, but in the toy line she has strawberry blonde hair. Perhaps this happened to make sure that She-Ra was unique in being the only figure in that first wave to have blonde hair. I don't know why that change occurred or why there's a differentiation between the toy line and the cartoon series, but that's my best assumption as to why there's a difference in the hair color between cartoon and toy. The She-Ra magazine that came out with the series did a pretty good job of trying to hybridize the designs of the toy line with the designs of the cartoon series. That first wave of Princess of Power toys was very different in most cases from what we got in the cartoon series. And the reasoning behind why that occurred is quite common with even the Masters of the Universe toy line and cartoon series, where there were a lot of differences between the toy figure and its cartoon counterpart. Often what would happen is a new figure or a new character would be developed for the toy line, and Mattel would pass that on to Filmation. Mattel being the toy company, Filmation being the cartoon producers. And Mattel would go to Filmation and say, hey, here's a new character that we're developing for the show. This is what we got on this character so far as the design goes and whatever type of character notes and features they had. So they would pass that on to Mattel would pass that on to Filmation, and Filmation would go on and commence with the development of that character for the cartoon series. Sometimes Mattel would pass on some updates, sometimes Mattel wouldn't, and oftentimes what would happen is that even though the notes and the designs were passed on to Filmation, the development and the design of the toy would actually keep going. So in a lot of cases, the look of the toy would not match up with the look of the cartoon series, because Filmation would have to take those designs and they would often have to simplify them for the sake of animation. So there were going to be some tweaks and differences anyway. But in other cases, the design of the character would just go in a whole radically different direction because of testing that they had to do, and they would have to change some things. Perhaps the colors didn't get approved, or the colors had to shift around. And so the toy would end up looking radically different from the cartoon model. But by the time the cartoon model was done and the character was featured on the show, because of budget, Filmation was not going to go back and change the character. And so that's typically what happened with that first wave of characters for the Princess of Power toy line. Just about all of them look nothing like their toy counterparts. It got a little better in Wave 2. Many of the characters in Wave 2 matched up more with their toy and toon counterparts. But that first wave, there was a lot of significant differences. Angella, as a character on the show, was developed by Larry DiTilio. And in the show, she was the Queen of Bright Moon. And she was introduced in episode 4 of the 5-part pilot, which was designated or deemed Secret of the Sword and actually had a theatrical release. She was the Queen of Bright Moon. She resided in Castle Bright Moon, and she derives her powers from the Moonstone. At full strength, she is more than a match for Shadow Weaver in the onslaught of the evil horde, a factor that makes Bright Moon one of the free regions of Etheria. The Horde was able to briefly conquer Bright Moon, but that was a short-lived success for the evil horde, and eventually Angella returned to her throne and was able to oust the evil horde from Bright Moon. She had the power of flight. She could emit light bursts and can even open dimensional portals, which is most likely at the height of her power. Angella, you see her throughout the series with varying levels of power ability. And that most likely ties into how powered up the Moonstone is and what phases the moons of Etheria are in. Because her powers wax and wane throughout the course of the series. She's featured in 14 episodes, which is pretty hefty. Not as many as other characters, but you could consider her a regular for sure. As compared to the toy line, however, Angella took a different path in the continuity of the toy line. The cartoon series was its own continuity, and then the toy line had its own continuity. Very disparate storylines there, very different tones, very different concepts going on. In the cartoon series, Hordak is the main antagonist. He's the ruthless leader of the evil horde. He rules Etheria from the Fright Zone, and he has a large array of villains and minions and weapons and armaments to fight against the Great Rebellion. In the toy line, Hordak is all but absent. He's not really part of the toy line continuity. He is featured once in the first mini comic, the introductory mini comic, but he's absent throughout the rest of the series. And Catra is the primary villain of the toy continuity. She's an evil sorceress, pretty powerful, but not on the level of Hordak, not commanding the armies that Hordak commands. So, in the mini comics that came with the toys, Angella was the Queen of Mizar, which is a region in the mountains that are presumably close to the Crystal Castle. And the Mizarians are a winged race very similar to Angella. So in the mini comics, Angella isn't a unique being as far as being angelic and winged. Her people have that same physical feature. In the mini comics, there is no direct indication that she is Glimmer's mother, although it's never ruled out what that relationship is between the two. And there's no mention of her relationship with Bright Moon. It's possible that Mizar is a region in Bright Moon. There could be arguments made that her being the queen of Mizar also makes her the queen of Bright Moon. But Mizar is not a region featured on the map of Etheria, which is an accessory that comes with the Crystal Castle playset. Bright Moon is featured on the map of Etheria. Mizar isn't. We could assume that Mizar is a region in Bright Moon, but that is never really explored. The mini-comic journey to Mizar, in which Angella is introduced, never elaborates on that, and it's the only time Angella is featured in the entire run of the Princess of Power mini-comics. Outside of the mini-comics, Angella is featured in a Kid Stuff storybook titled The Crystal Castle. In this storybook, she's depicted in her Filmation design. Angella basically plays the role of Light Hope. She makes her home in the Crystal Castle. She is She-Ra's advisor and confidant, and basically guides her through a lot of adventures in a very similar role to Light Hope, or even the Sorceress of Castle Grayskull from the Masters of the Universe cartoon series. I don't know why she was depicted that way. It's very different from the cartoon series. It's also very different from the toy line, but it actually is my favorite version of the Angella character, and I pretty much consider that the definitive version of the character. Perhaps in the cartoon series she would have eventually taken Light Hope's place or partnered up with Light Hope. That's just how it works in my mind. Here is Angella's Masters of the Universe Classics action figure. This figure was released in 2015 as part of the subscription for Masters of the Universe Classics, and it takes the Filmation cartoon design, or the style guide design of Angella, and combines some features from the vintage Princess of Power action fashion doll. So, for example, her bodice features some details that are influenced directly from the action fashion doll. The ribbing on the top of her bodice there is directly from the action fashion doll. Her halo is a direct influence from the action fashion doll. Her belt, the jagged design of her belt, is from the action fashion doll, and of course the details on her boots, the ribbing on her boots, is taken directly from the action fashion doll. The rest of the figure is directly based. It's how a lot of people will remember her from the Filmation cartoon series. I think it's a beautiful figure. It's 2017 now. I've just left her on display, and so she doesn't have a lot of playwear, but her joints are pretty tight still. Of course, I don't play with her much, so she's got articulation at the shoulders, at the bicep. She's got the elbow articulation, and she's got articulation at the wrists. She does come with her sword, which is taken from the cartoon series. She's got swivel at the waist. She's got some articulation in her hip leg joints, at the knee, and of course she's got the ankle joint, which on mine came pretty tight. The wings are actually quite controversial. They're taken from the Hawkman action figure from the DC Universe Classics action figures. So it's a mold lifted right from there. But they work very well on this character, and I'm just thankful that we did finally get her. So there you have it. We've looked at Angella. We've done a comprehensive review of her vintage action fashion doll from 1985. We've looked at her cartoon and mini comics depictions, and we've taken a look at her Masters of the Universe Classics release in 2015. Let me know if I've left anything out. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. And until the next time, ta-ta for now.